Okay, picking up where we left off, like I said, how we learn determines what we remember. So we're going to talk about the memory process and how that goes. So the first thing with memory is you have to pay attention. You absolutely have to pay attention. If you don't, then it's just not going to be something that you remember. So when it comes to the memory process, when you first get information, so from your environment, maybe there's sounds, there's smells, there's sensations, but you can't pay attention to everything at once. You would go literally insane. We kind of depend on our ability to focus on some things and kind of let other things fade into the background. And so our sensory memory is our memory just for things that we hear or see that we aren't paying attention to. And it's very, very brief, extremely brief. If you've ever had someone talk to you, or maybe you're daydreaming in class and the teacher calls on you and asks you to answer a question, but you weren't paying attention, even though you weren't paying attention, you might still remember, you still might be able to quote unquote hear the last couple of words that they said. And so you might try to kind of go, and see if you can kind of guess an answer based on what your guess of the question was. But generally, if you're not paying attention to something, what you see will go away from your memory in a matter of milliseconds, fractions of a second. And your memory for things that you hear only lasts maybe 3 to 4 seconds. So it's very, very brief. Unless you actually sustain attention, it's going to be in one ear and out the other. So in order to ultimately remember something, you have to do something with that information. Okay, so you have to either rehearse it, say it over again, or you have to break it down into chunks to remember, or you need to use some nifty memory devices, these mnemonic devices, strategies, or make associations between some information and information that you already have. So again, you have to be active with that information. And that's where what you're doing with that is you're trying to get that information in your working memory. So you're working with it, you're doing stuff with it, and the most common way that we do that is rehearsal. So just reading something over and over again or saying something to ourselves over and over again. It's a very, very rudimentary way of trying to keep information in our working memory. So your working memory is just your kind of conscious, what I'm thinking about right now memory. And if you don't do anything with that, then that goes away in about 30 seconds. If you've ever watched the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, he gets a phone call and they say, call our secretary. She'll set up an appointment for you for this interview that he's been it could change his life, but his pen is dry, so he's trying to write down the number, and he said, let's say the person says 555-1843, and he's like 555-1843, yes, thank you, I'll be there, and he's just repeating it over and over again, 555-1843, 555-1843, while he tries to find a pen. He's using rehearsal. Now, there are some limitations to our working memory. We can only hold about 5 to 9 meaningful pieces of information at one time. So that's why our phone numbers actually don't get much bigger than they are. That we're more likely to start a new area code than to make numbers bigger. And we can also only handle about 1 to 6 new ideas per minute before it starts to kind of overload our ability to remember what's being said. And again, without duration, the duration without rehearsal is only going to be 5 to 20 seconds, 30 seconds max. Everything reminds me of a movie, but in 50 First Dates, 10-Second Tom, he just every 10 seconds forgets what's been said to him. And there really is, there's a real life 10-Second Tom named Clive Wearing, who he has lost both his prospective and retrospective memory. And so, yeah, you can ask him a question and he'll give you an answer, but while he's giving you the answer, he's already forgotten the question. That's how short his memory is. So it's something that you really have to, it's limited, but it does serve a purpose. Now, what you do while you have this information is really going to affect its likelihood of moving into long-term memory. So it's not just out of sight, out of mind. Because of the nature of this working memory, you'll see a couple of effects. One is the serial position effect, which is a combination of two effects, primacy and recency. So it's just the idea that we recall things best that came first. So if when I read you the list, when I say rest and you think rest, and then I say bed and you think rest, bed, and I say night and you think rest, bed, night, rest, bed, I say quilt and you're like, ah. Okay, so you're able to remember the first items in the list a little bit better because you had more of an opportunity to rehearse them a little bit more. Towards the middle of that, it gets a little bit fuzzy because you haven't been able to really rehearse that information at all because I'm already just throwing more words at you. But then the last couple of words, those are also more likely to be recalled because they came at the end, they're very recent, they're still in your sensory memory, and so it's easier for you to recall those words. So just that combination effect of we tend to remember the beginning of it and the end of it more than things in the middle, that's a combination of the primacy and recency effect. And the reason why we want to know that is because you want to not give yourself so much information all at one time to try to learn. You want to break it down into easier chunks, and we'll get to that in a second. The other thing is we have what's called a forgetting curve, where you want to give yourself actually some time to forget a little bit and then remember and then forget again a little bit and then remember, because this constant review again is a form of rehearsal, and it forges pathways in your brain that help to make it more likely to be activated later on. So let's say you have two people and both of them have perfectly memorized a long list of words. Well, 24 hours later, they'll remember only about 80% of that list correctly, and after 3 days it'll go down to about 60%. So let's say you have one person and they memorize this list perfectly, and then they're quizzed on it 3 days later without doing anything else with this information. They'll probably get about a 60% on that quiz. But if you have someone else that they memorize the list of words and a day later they review the list of words, then when you get to day 3, they're recalling about 80%. So you're seeing a difference of 80% versus 60%. And so forth and so on. The more times you kind of go back and review, the shallower that forgetting curve becomes. So that's one of the reasons why you want to review your notes often. You want to hear the lecture, you want to read the book, you want to review your notes right after class, you want to write a little summary, and then maybe at the end of the week look that information over really briefly. You're giving yourself these reviews to help make that learning curve more shallow, okay? And you'll see that in your grades. I'm not saying it's going to be exactly like this because this is a very specific experiment here. But again, because of that and because of the primacy and recency effect, you do want to see a pattern in your studying that is more like Leslie right here. Okay, so let's say you have 4 hours of studying that you need to do for an exam. Well, you want to break that up. Maybe do half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, half an hour the next morning, half an hour the next evening, and so on and so forth. So that would be ideal. You also might have a situation where someone maybe studies for an hour on Monday, an hour on Tuesday, an hour on Wednesday, an hour on Thursday, and that would be okay too. And then you have Nora over here who just tried to cram it all into her head in one large 4-hour block. And again, the stuff in the middle is going to get fuzzy. There's a lot of information coming at her, a lot of new ideas per minute, and so that's going to be hard for her to process deeply enough and well enough in order for that to stick. So that's one of the reasons why we're telling you about memory, is that it really influences. It's the science behind why you should study the way that we're telling you to study. And this is something that you'll be able to view in the actual PowerPoint, but I think it's just a fun video that just kind of. To me, it seems like the beginning of the semester when it's like, okay, yeah, we've got this, and then things just kind of all go to heck when it comes really fast at you, and the professor says, everyone got that? Good. And you're like, no, wait, I'm not ready. Okay, so because of what we know, there are going to be some tips and tricks for reducing that information. If you remember, I talked about rehearsal. There's also something called chunking. So we're going to have another video on chunking and other memory aids, things that you can do to help process that information more deeply so that you can move that information into your long-term memory.